to look at them, to be mistakel on them. It says problem to tour the Vatican. It's a problem to tour old churches, old nunneries, old seminaries. Ramosha has a tshuva pertaining to, let's say, you have a seminary or a cathedral that's no longer, its sole purpose, its sole existence nowadays is no longer practice. It's only a museum. They have old churches that they've totally, in New York, they have a nunnery that was completely converted into a museum. They wanted to ask Ramosha in Manhattan if they could go to it. And that's a separate discussion. Maybe we'll reach on that now. But right now we're speaking about it was built for a church. So maybe it's no longer a Beis Avodah Zarah. Once it stopped to be used, another function, right? It's not active. Well, so the discussion would be whether or not you could say that you only are not allowed if it's so Rav Moshe, so Tosfos on the spot, Tosfos tells us this discussion is not only relevant to imagery that was created for idolatrous purpose. It's not only relevant to a statue of a cross or other images that relate to religion, but also any statue. Min hadin, we're not allowed to make a sculpture, a statue. So Tosfos brings down Ikar hadin. The din is only when it's created for idolatrous purpose, when the image itself serves some form for the religion. But there's a Yech Machmirim, there is a Hiddur, he brings down from the Gemara in Avodah Zarah that a certain Amira wouldn't even look at the coin. The images on the coin he wouldn't look at because he didn't want to have enough from any form of imagery that Torah doesn't allow. But this is the Tami Ikar hadin. So Tosfos tells us there are two levels of our interaction with Avodah Zarah. There's imagery. Yeah, so that's what Tosfos is discussing. Tosfos is talking that pictures or images that, that's yeah.
Queen Elizabeth has a little cross on her crown, and she's had a dollar bill.
So we're going to speak about what you said. Does that mean you can't use the pound? So we'll speak about that. But that is a cross, and that would be a problem, technically. So. What it used to be a church. Yeah. So that's separate halachas. Once you purchase a church, I mean, there's no issue from buying a church. But how do you convert a church? Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, right, so you make a shul, you make a yeshiva there, right? You don't go right away from the church to
Like a chair that was built on I don't think you need to go there's another side. When you buy a church, you're giving them money and they're going to use it for the result. That there's a way to do it. No, I'm just saying, obviously, isn't that a problem? Like if you buy a church,
you're going to get to that. We are going to get to that. That's a few weeks. We're going to discuss how to buy a church. Like you're not let seemingly. We'll discuss about if you, let's say, you're a landlord and you bought a multi-purpose property, multi-unit property, or you own an old age home, and within your old age home you have a synagogue, you have a mosque, you have a church. You're not allowed to do work on that church. You're not allowed to do repairs, and there's an issur to be miyafia to make it beautiful. Avodah Zarah. So how does that work? What do you do? How do you manage that? How do you manage that property? How do you purchase a property that's going to go towards them? So that I hope to discuss in future weeks. Right now, I just want to lay out the foundational column for our interaction with Avodah Zarah. So this halacha, this distinction between something that was made for its purpose to serve Avodah Zarah and something that it just happens to be usher for not Torah because of the statues and the like, but the statue, let's say Michelangelo, the David, was not meant for any Isser purposes, but you wouldn't be able to craft one because it's a statue. It's a human likeness.
But you could view it.
So we're going to speak about that. Meaning, Mikra Din, you should be able to view it. Tosfos brings down that Tosfos and Shabbos says it's only Mikra Din, it's fine. Now the Shach tells us the same thing. The Shach tells us on page number 11, Pirish, when we say that it's also to mean to look at it, what does that mean? With those idols themselves, Shenavdu asur listakal b'hem liris noya. That were created for avodah zarah. That's when it's asur. Albu tzur shenasu l'noy v'loyla lo'ived b'vur b'tois v'svaharash the mutter. It's clear in the Rosh that such images are mutter. But if you look in the Mishnah Berurah on page number 12, he brings that it's not so simple that that's the case. He quotes the Magen Avraham. The Magen Avraham says on page number 12, he says, "Asur listakal b'div like this." Because of Taisus Shabbos tells us that it's only when it was created for avodah zarah, but when it's just l'noy, it's mutter. When it's just for its beautiful purpose, it's mutter. But he brings down that there are machmirim. There's an opinion in Taisus in Masechet avodah zarah, and that's what the Magen Avraham writes. That when do we say that it's mutter to nikra din mutter to view images that were not made for avodah zarah? That's also if you glance at them. So, like you said, you have $1, you have a bill, an English pound that has a cross on it. So then it's fine to look at happenstance, but to stare at it, to appreciate its beauty, that's asur mikra din also, the Magen Avraham says. So what's the nafkamina for that? That nafkamina is good. Can you go to a museum? Can you stare at statues? Can you appreciate? Can you study the artistry from the thinking man, from David, from all those things, all those statues? You know, you're allowed to see them, you're allowed to see images of them, but can you really appreciate their beauty? If it's asur min haTorah to make, and the Magen Avraham says he feels that it's asur to stare at them. And Rav Moshe says that Rav Moshe makes a very important note that when do we make this distinction between beauty and avodah zarah? What draws that line? Is it, let's say you have a church and you'll have gargoyles. Oftentimes you'll have gargoyles on the outside exterior of the church, and you also have images from the New Testament. So the images from the New Testament play a religious role. Let's say the images that are painted, especially in an Orthodox church, there's stained glass windows, there's a lot of imagery. So that would be asur for sure, make that there. What about the gargoyles outside? The gargoyles outside, the statues they put outside, play no religious role, have no religious significance. The significance is an architectural one.
They're made for trade purposes.
Yeah, I mean, it's an architectural one to make it beautified, meaning they need drains. They need to have a hole there and opening. So they put a statue of an animal with a mouth.
Grotesque.
Yes. So Rav Moshe says those are also asur to look at any circumstance, because even though they don't play a religious role, but they are attached to, they are a part of a base of avodah zarah. So therefore, they gain the status of a statue of avodah zarah. That's Rav Moshe. Rav Moshe in the shuva over here, we're not going to discuss. Rav Moshe speaks about listening to church music. And he says that would also be pertain to this isser of having an off from avodah zarah to listen for church music, even if it's not in the context of service. Oh, so we're speaking about gardens and courtyards. Now, once we've established this idea to stay away from avodah zarah, how far does that isser pertain? But you're not allowed to go to the church. You're not allowed to be within parameters of a church. You're not allowed to even look at its exterior and appreciate the beauty. And we have, a step further, we have a Mishnah in Masechet Avodah Zarah and Daf Yud Aleph on base. The Mishnah tells us this on page 14. A city that has avodas kechavim, has idolatry, has a church or any other form of, avodah zarah. Chutzala mutter. It's mutter to go outside that city, travel through the city if you're on the road. Hi, chutzala avodas kechavim teichei lo mutter mahu leilach sham. So that means if chutzala is mutter, that means inside of the city. It's also to be within the city. So what happens if there's a road that goes to the city? So the Mishnah says if it's a highway that goes through the city and you can continue traveling outside of the city to different places, different locations, then you can take the road. But if the sole purpose of the road is solely to enter this city, then the road's asur. So seemingly, this creates a very big problem for us. There's not a city, there's not a town that doesn't have a church. There's not a road that doesn't lead to a city with a church. And even if it leads to a different city, the city that it ultimately leads to is a city with a church. So what do? So I just wanted to note that the Belzerov, when he came to Eretz Yisrael and one of the other Rabbeim, they moved to Tel Aviv. They elected not to live in Yerushalayim, and they chose to live in Tel Aviv. Even though Yerushalayim the standard of religion in Yerushalayim is much more than that of Tel Aviv. So they asked Rav Aaron Belzer why. He said because there's no churches in Tel Aviv at that time. Now there's everything, but Yerushalayim there are churches and mosques. Tel Aviv was 100% Jewish, and that's why he wanted to live in Tel Aviv over living in Yerushalayim. And many other Rabbeim and Rebbes and Rosh Yeshivas chose to set up their shtibulach and their yeshivas in Tel Aviv over Yerushalayim for that express purpose. That's why the Chazon Ish was there. But they felt this need. So what do? So we find right away Rashi gives us a header. Rashi tells us the whole purpose why we have this din that we can't travel to a city with Avodah Zarah is because people might suspect you of going to the church, and Rashi says therefore this issue only applies to before a major holiday, before Easter, before other holidays. That's when you have to stay away from these cities. When they're having a major religious celebration, a Jew shouldn't be found that they shouldn't be suspect. Mar Zayin. So when you live in the city, we'll see from Rabbeinu Yoina and other Rishonim, if you live there, there's no Mar Zayin that you're going to that city because that's a city where you live, it's a city where Jews live. Could be you're going there for your residence. The problem though is the Rambam. The Rambam says explicitly you're not allowed to live in a city with Avodah Zarah, and it doesn't matter if it's Yom 8 or not. It has nothing to do with Mar Zayin. It has to do with the explicit Isser of being in an area that contains Avodah Zarah. The Rambam though writes, just running through some of the pages now, page 18 in Pirush HaMishnayos.
The Rambam lived in Spain, where every town was a massive center church with a small little Jewish ghetto on the side.
So the Rambam says, though this is Bizman HaGemara, where there are other cities available. But now he says, Machmas Einis. There's no, if you were to make sure not to live in a place with a church, you're not going to travel a road that leads to a church. You're not going to be able to live anywhere, you're not going to be able to travel anywhere. But that's why Machmas Einsoi, we have to live in these cities. Though it is important to note that the Rambam chose to live in Egypt over living in Yerushalayim. The Rambam spent a few months in Yerushalayim, and he left and he went to Cairo. He went to live in Cairo, whatever. Now we call Cairo. And there's a reason that Shazash said, I'm not sure if it's from a Rav Rambam or Rambam Son or other sources, that's the reason why the Rambam left Yerushalayim, left Eretz Yisrael, and went to Egypt, even though there's a question of living in Mitzrayim with Manazah, is because in Yerushalayim there were churches, there were Batei Avodah Zarah, and in the Caliphate in Egypt there were only mosques. There was no churches to be found, and a mosque is not a base of Avodah Zarah, not Apikurs. It's not. They believe in Navi Sheker. They believe in a God. This has a false prophet. It's Apikurs for a Jew to believe, but it doesn't make the mosque a base of Avodah Zarah. There's no issue about Jews going to the mosque, and that's how we're able to go to the mosque. That's how this question about going to mosque was really at the forefront of the conversation in 1967, when the Jews got Hebron.
You go to Muslim, to a mosque, you'll be spiritually fine, but physically probably not. The other way, if you go to a church, you will be physically perfectly fine, but spiritually destroyed. Either way.
So this, not that I found. The Rebbe says it's a misconception that people have, and let's throw down. It's only in Hilchos Shvuos. It's not their stature of a Zarah. The misconception that when Tosfos calls Christianity Shituk, it means to preclude them from the status of a Zarah. The Rebbe says it's only to preclude them from certain dim of a Zarah, but they still have the status of a Zarah. Not that I'm aware of. It's in your day. It's not in Simon that we have this money that we have from Alter Rebbe. It could be in other places, maybe brought down, but not that I'm familiar with. So the question of mosque really came to the forefront in 1967 when the Jews, we got the Mars Machpelah. Can you go down in Mars Machpelah? That was a big question. The mosque, right there, Kivrei Avos, but yeah. Mars Machpelah, outside of Kivrei Avos, all the other Kifarim are mosques.
But we don't go there.
We go Chayesar.
They're allowed to enact.
We go to Pashas Chayesar, right? Pashas Chayesar, everybody goes to Mars Machpelah. I was never there. There are many chuvas.
Government lets you go, but
You don't go to the mosque.
The whole structure is a mosque.
No.
When they built the structure,
It's a different entrance completely.
but it's the same building.
Same building, yeah, same Arab.
I understand. When you go to Kever Yitzchak Yaakov on Parshat Sarah, then that's where if you go the next Friday, they'll be praying there, right? What?
כן, אבל זה לא איפה שהמוסלמים מתפללים. אתה עובר ליד, אני הייתי שם, זה ליד. יש פי, don't go through their mosque. Whatever, maybe same building, let's try that. No, but that's not that. אתה לא עובר בתוך מסגד, וזה הכל מסגד.
What? So I said that's where this discussion came to the forefront, the Mars Machpelah or other Kfarim. Kever Mordechai and Esther, let's say.
Correct.
So but the question is, meaning if they built a church of it, then you wouldn't be able to go there.
That's taken over by
So but it's not a church, it's a Muslim.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there and see what.
By the way, that's first of all the show.
So is it an operating church? Then it would probably be a problem. Yes. It doesn't matter. They made it Avodah Zarah. They might have done the wrong thing and they stole it from us.
That if I bow down to your iPad, I can't turn your thing without Avodah Zarah.
I don't know.
When you say grab anything and turn into a sir.
I'm saying if they started the Christians, they took over the show, Rahman al-San, and they started, they designated. I said the mass is not a problem, but there are opinions in the poskim. This is the reason why it was a discussion is because there's a Sefer Eshkol. The mass. We were speaking about if there's an issue of going to the mass. I said the way this discussion came up, where most people, where there's a consensus and there's no issue with going to mass, is the Chuvas in 1967. But the reason to be worried about the Mars Machpelah is because the Rambam writes that Islam is not Avodah Zarah, but the Sefer Eshkol, one of the early Rishonim in Ashkenaz, writes that it is Avodah Zarah. They say that the reason is that Eshkol was not speaking about Islam. He didn't know the religion. He was getting reports from Europe, and he was speaking about other Arabian religions. But since he wrote that, so Rishonim, Ashkenazic Rishonim, followed his tzak. So the discussion was, what did the Sefer Eshkol mean? Was he referring to Islam as its practice, or Islam as it was reported to him in the 10th, 11th century? So that was the discussion. So the Rambam says that because Baba Niseno Arabim, we're stuck and we have no choice, therefore we can live in cities with the mosque. Therefore we can live in cities with the church. We're anusim. Yeah, we don't have Mashiach. Everything's our fault. We're welcome to the religion.
What's the mechanism that says that because we're stuck, we live with it? What's that mechanism? The legal mechanism? In other words, you could say that about lots of things.
I would guess the mechanism would be, that when you have a choice, meaning there's the whole issue is that you have to distance yourself from Avodah Zarah, right? That's the issue. The mitzvah is.
This is happening with, like, for example, like Shemitah and all these sorts of other things that come up, or
So the mechanism for this particular issue would be the following: the mitzvah is to distance yourself from Avodah Zarah, right? So therefore, you can't live in a city with a church. But if you're there, if you can't just.
Everyone has to move out like the Mormons did and go to Nowheresville, and you have to just live there. That would be living by your principle.
Everybody followed them, and now this is the
No, but seriously, you could say, you know what? That's the din. We have to live with the mitzvah. You can't be in near Avodah Zarah, and you have to move to nowhere.
It's not distinct anymore.
And then I'm always gonna hire a boy every neighborhood and I want to buy a house. Put the children, I buy all the houses for the children. I make money.
That's if Jews will follow the law.
They're not allowed.
So I guess meaning it's not a particular mitzvah that you have to be. I would assume, and this is just off the cuff, that
Do me a favor, stop assuming,
okay.
Okay?
So the whole thing is to be nisrachik from Avodah Zarah, to distance yourself from Avodah Zarah. when you have no choice, I mean, yeah, you have a theoretical option of moving, making a town in Montana, whatever, incorporating unincorporated land and making a town.
But it's not totally theoretical. People have done this lots of times, right? Recently, that they're making a school. They're making a new town right now in the middle of nowhere. It's all made.
Correct. So the question though is, meaning that's when I have two options. When I have two viable options, I can't electively go to a base of Avodah Zarah, maybe, right? I can't choose to be near Avodah Zarah. But when it's not, meaning it's a theoretical option, but it's not a practical option, and also, maybe now it might be different. Maybe right now, maybe now there's.
It's not practical close. People would say it's not practical close your store down one day a week on the busiest day. It's not practical. That argument.
Well, no, because this is the Rabbanon sorted out from Sukkim and Mishlei as opposed to a Deraisa that has certain obligations to its adherents, right? The Rabbanon, the axiom with which they function or what they demand from the person is less than. Though whether or not it's the Rabbanon is actually Machlokes Rishonim, what's the status? The Ritva Avodah Zarah holds it's Isser Yareg Val Yaver to go into a church. Not this particular Isser of living in a city of a church, but to enter a church is Yareg Val Yaver. There's a story from Mendel Chaim, the son of Radatz, that there was a pogrom in his village, and the local bishop opened up the church for the Jews to seek refuge, and he said he's not entering Yareg Val Yaver, I'm not going to step foot in a church, and he was killed because of that. Mikra Adim, you don't have to, but it is relevant when it does come into place for AA meetings. It's the basement of a church, explicit Isser to mention. The Das and Rishonim with Yareg Val Yaver to enter the premises of the church. So what do? Meaning, oftentimes, those are likely to be Pikuach Nefesh cases, and there's definitely room for leniency and definitely discussion, but it is a conversation that's had amongst the poskim. So the Ritva is the one that holds Yareg Val Yaver. The Rosh holds that it's not Yareg Val Yaver, which is therefore Pikuach Nefesh according to the Rosh, and the Rosh, we usually pass in the Rosh over the Ritva. The Rosh is mainly a Paisek, so therefore we don't pass in Yareg Val Yaver. But the fact that there is opinion that holds Yareg Val Yaver tells us the severity of the issue. So just skipping through.
Saying anything topless today, or it's
Sounds like you're going to be starting lots of churches and buying up lots of property.
So you're not allowed to enter a chater of Avodah Zarah. You're not allowed to go to museum. You're not allowed to go to a courtyard. If the Rav Moshe has a tshuva, if there's what? So the question is, if it's no longer a functioning church and it's only a museum, so that's a question amongst the participants. So they probably follow that, it's fine. But let's say Rav Moshe has a tshuva regarding a conservative or reform shul that has a gym, and the yeshiva guys want to use it. So even more so for a Catholic school or a church, Catholic school that has the church on premises, reform temple. Yes.
I'm saying you're not allowed to go to
No, not allowed to go. No, it's considered a base minus. It's a base. No, it's a base minus. They don't believe base apikursum. You're not allowed to enter. That's not the only thing that they practice or believe in a reformed congregation, right?
I used to work in a reform. I used to be in the kitchen.
Rav Moshe Paskins, in page number 26 and 27.
No, I was in the kitchen, not in the kitchen.
That Moshe says it's also to rent space from a conservative shul, conservative temple, to daven there. And he goes because it's a base minus. They don't believe in Taras Moshe. They don't believe in Taras Neshamayim. And then he was also asked on page number 27 regarding having a gym, whether or not children can play in a gym in a conservative shul. Moshe felt it was also.
So this shul over here, what you call it, and where you? Becky.
So you're not allowed to go inside.
You're not allowed to go inside?
No.
Wow, I'm shocked.
They asked Rav Moshe.
What?
They asked Rav Moshe once if it's somebody.
That's what I'm saying. We did go there. You see, did you know? You're not going to the shul?
I know what you're saying, you're growing up in
He said
Manhattan.
yes.
Should I ask Rabbi Kessler?
I'm
Okay.
sure there's exceptions.
That's what I was thinking, you have a secret like that.
Wow, we should announce this, I didn't know, that church is.
Okay.
That's it. מה את צוחקת, אני רציני.
So Ramosha is speaking about using their gym. Yeah. Ramosha speaks about, on page number 27, I don't know if you have, Ramosha speaks about using the gym. It means not going into the shul. Ramosha says you shouldn't use their gym. You shouldn't go into the building. So YMCA is what meaning it's a solely it's a record. I understand, but meaning there's also a church there.
Not usually not.
So then it's not a problem. Meaning you can go to a Christian building. You can go to a building that's owned by Christians. You just can't go to a building that has or a space that's solely designated to worship. And I'll tell you this: there's a big problem, and people that are
Reform shul, any shul that's not orthodox?
any shul that's not orthodox, conservative and reform.
And when you say orthodox and conservative, what are you referring to?
I mean, Moshe Kibbutz Torah, the Sinai, Moshe Yeshua. Somebody that you have to believe in Yud Gimel Ikrim. Any shul that doesn't believe in Yud Gimel Ikrim gains the status of the Beis Minus, the house of Apikuros. And that's where they go. Wow. The same Gemara that we brought on Daf Yud Zayin, when it put Beis Avodah it said Beis Minus also, it gives it the same status as a church. So now the question is, just to end off, what about voting? What about voting in a church?
Are you allowed to go to a Apikoros house?
You're allowed to go to Apikoros' house. That's how people do that. You're allowed to go to Apikoros' house. It just so Moshe Sternbach speaks about when they had in South Africa, they have some place in America, they'll have on the campus of a church, they'll have a voting booth. They'll have voting for that district. So Ramosha, many poskim ask for voting in such a case. For Rav Sternbach, when he was in South Africa, the elections of Johannesburg were all being hosted by a church, and he found a makom heter that since it's a different wing of the building, it's not the same. It's a different part of the building. Rav Sternbach said, and it's being designated for solely secular purposes. Rav Sternbach allowed it, but yeah.
For weddings during that time also, or not?
People didn't go to it.
It was weddings there, people.
There were weddings, but people did not go to the weddings. I guess it
The
was
Zirkins.
religion, probably.
There are families in Granite that won't send to Torah because it used to be a conservative, and they still have a Bible. It's in the contract of the building.
Those radicals are.
I'm not saying that that's right. I'm not saying that they're correct, but I know that there are people.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
My pleasure.
I'm going.